Red Hill moving forward. Our panel will feature the following: Captain Cameron Geertsma, Commander, Naval Facilities Engineering Systems Command, Hawaii; Major General Mark Hashimoto, Mobilization Assistant to the Commander, U.S. Indo-PACOM. We have Aurora Kagawa Viviani, Assistant Professor, Geography and Environment from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Commissioner, Commission on Water Resource Management, State of Hawaii. Joseph Pickard, Chairman, President, Native Hawaiian Community Development Corporation. Tara Sutton, undergraduate student or member, University of Hawaii Red Hill Task Force. Donald Thomas, senior researcher, co-founder, Hawaii Groundwater and Geothermal Research Center, University of Hawaii at Manoa. And our discussion this afternoon will be moderated by Vasilis Sirmos, Vice President for Research and Innovation, UH System. How about a round of applause for our final session this afternoon?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for staying late, but how could we have water resilience and without the Red Hill, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, or elephant, if you will. So with that, I think every panelist has been introduced, but I want to take a little bit of a different tack and ask each one of them a little bit of their background and what is their connection with Red Hill, if any. So maybe I can start with General Hashimoto.
All right, thank you, sir. I'll get the formalities out of the way. I'm a graduate of Maimai Elementary School. And after I graduated from Maimai Elementary School, I went to a private high school in Lower Manoa, whose colors are blue and yellow. And it is a privilege for me to serve as a Major General in the United States Marine Corps. And it's an honor for me to be part of this panel because this is a really important topic at a really important time for both the state of Hawaii and the DoD. So my purpose on this panel is to enhance the understanding of the totality of the DoD's response to the water crisis in the context of the DoD's long-term presence in Hawaii, acknowledging that what is at the heart of this crisis are people. You know, the advocates for the environment, the responders, the scientists and other experts, and of course the ones who are directly impacted by the contaminants. And so my qualifications to be on this panel, besides being in the military and being from here, is that my job is to work with all of the services in Hawaii to increase their understanding of the importance of working with the community. And because I am from here and live here, I know where we've been. As a community, I know what the history is and how that impacts us moving forward. And here's a spoiler alert, there's only one way for the state of Hawaii and the military to move forward, and that's together. So the DoD approach to dealing with this crisis has many facets. I'll get into that during the panel. Each of them requires different expertise. So Captain Geertsma and I are here. If we were to cover this completely, you would have a medical doctor up here with us, and then you would have a representative from the Joint Task Force that is, as you know, unpacking, that is taking the fuel out of the 1 million gallons that is in the pipelines up here also. But in no way did we want to crowd out the very, very important voices that are up here on the panel today. Really, and most of all, I would love to, more than anything, to have somebody up here with deep medical expertise to deal with really what are the compelling and from my perspective, heartbreaking stories about the families that have been impacted by the exposure to the harmful chemicals. And what about the trust issue? I got that one. We'll get to it. Thank you for the opportunity to participate, sir.
Thanks, Mark. Joe?
Thank you. My name is Joe Pickard. I grew up on the North Shore. I'm a graduate of Kahuku High School. After I graduated, I went to the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, got commissioned, and then I served in the Coast Guard for about 6 years. Got an undergraduate degree in civil engineering. served my time in the Coast Guard, enjoyed the heck out of it. Got to a juncture where I decided whether or not I was going to stay in the service or go into the private sector. I had an opportunity to go to Columbia University. Went there, I was on an Exxon fellowship, received a degree in industrial engineering, and also was an Exxon fellow at Columbia University. I was in investment banking for a short while, and then went to Asia and worked there. I had no plans whatsoever to come home to Hawaii and do any of the stuff that we're doing right now, but I missed home, missed my family. So I moved back when I was in my mid-30s and opened up a small little business with my brothers. We were doing charter boat stuff, having fun, and then Desert Storm hit. We almost went broke, and I had to go out and get a real job, so I started working as a project manager out of Ko'olina. I was the project manager for the lagoons, the harbor, the new harbor they were building. Got heavily involved in that, and then opened up a small business with my high school friend. We started doing environmental engineering, civil engineering, and then got to work with the federal government. Currently, we have several businesses under our Native Hawaiian organization. We do work throughout the country. Some of the work is in ordnance removal. Do work in Martha's Vineyard, Yuma, Arizona. In Huntsville, Alabama, we have contracts there. We do fuels work, Waterloo, Iowa, different places throughout the country, and we've grown it from a relatively new business to a fairly large business when you consider the size of businesses in Hawaii. Our primary objective is, as the Native Hawaiian Community Development Corporation, is to build capability within our community. Instead of bringing in all of the different experts from different parts of the country to weigh in on some of the items that we have to deal with in Hawaii on a daily basis, our effort is to grow our local capability. We have some of our young people here in the audience that we hope someday, instead of having to go out and procure services internationally from outside the state, we can provide many of the support functions that's necessary to sustain our communities. We try to do a lot of work with the University of Hawaii when we have the opportunity. We've been involved in a deep sea chemical munitions program with the university, and currently we're going to be supporting Dr. Don Thomas in his effort to study the aquifer under Red Hill.
My history with Hawaii, I came to Hawaii in 1972 as an aspiring graduate student. I attended the University of Hawaii and spent several years studying Kilauea. I came here as a chemist. I became a geochemist, where I'm using chemistry to understand sort of the natural processes that are occurring within Hawaii's geology, within the geothermal system on Kilauea. I spent about 20 years doing research there in Puna on the geothermal reservoir to understand sort of its chemistry and its dynamics. And then became involved in a couple of projects that really drew me into hydrogeology. I describe myself kind of as an accidental hydrologist. We drilled a deep borehole, a scientific project funded by National Science Foundation in Hilo. And we drilled down to 11,000 feet below sea level. And the results of that we expected to be quite boring, that we would see the basal freshwater lens and then salt water below, except we didn't. We found fresh water in multiple layers down below sea level. The first at about 1,000 feet, and we actually found fresh water as deep as 10,000 feet below sea level. And that told me that there's an awful lot to learn about this system that we don't already know. And that led to a couple of other projects that I've been working on that have really told me how complex Hawaii's hydrogeology is and how much more we really need to know to be able to manage it and ensure that it's being managed in a sustainable way. And so more recently, I have worked with Department of Health, volunteered with them to assist them in understanding the hydrogeology at Red Hill, which I would add is probably one of the most hydrologically complex areas, certainly on this island, and try to help them understand and develop a model for groundwater flow to be able to assess the risk of any releases from the Navy or other releases from other sources in that area to the municipal water system here in Honolulu.
Thanks, Tara.
I'm Tara Sutton. I'm not as fancy as everybody else. I am an undergraduate student at UH Manoa, and I am a guest here in Hawaii. I moved here from Alaska 3 years ago with my husband, who is in the Air Force. So we live on Hickam Air Force Base. So my connection to Red Hill is that we consumed the water. My family got sick. My cat got sick. I think that my area of expertise is just humanizing the impacts of the water contamination and understanding not just what took place from the scientific or the political side, but just what does it feel like? How did my life change? How did many other people's lives change? What is needed to move forward? The courses that I'm taking at UH Manoa, I will graduate in spring with my bachelor's degree. I'm very excited about that because my kids are also in college. So we all do homework at night together. I'm doing a triple major to make up for some lost time. I'm doing communicology, anthropology, and ethnic studies. I see the intersectionality of that looking at how communication and anthropology and the study of various cultures and people owning their own stories and being able to tell their stories from their perspectives is vital, and how those stories can be used in persuasive ways to have an impact at the social change level, at policy change level, rather than persuasion only going from policymakers down to the general public, but going in the other direction as well. So that's my role. I will be going to stay in Hawaii through 2026 at this point, and continuing into graduate school. No spoilers until I've been accepted into a program. We'll save that announcement and see what happens. This is the semester for me to be applying, and I'm hopeful that I'll be accepted someplace.
My turn? All right. My name's Cameron Gertzma. I'm from Texas. I grew up an Army brat, so I don't really have a home. I am a visitor in Hawaii. I've been here visiting now for 2.5 years. I say that because as General Hashimoto made statement, it goes back 5 generations, and he still makes the statement that he's a visitor as well, and respecting the culture. A guest, yes, sir. A guest, thank you, sir. I'm with Naval Facilities Engineering Systems Command, Hawaii. I'm the commanding officer. I just took command this summer. My link, if you will, to Red Hill. I'm also a civil engineer by trade. Texas A&M, as well as the University of Texas Masters, competing interests there. But nevertheless, my link is I live also on base at Makalapa, PAC Fleet. My family was impacted as well, not only from a family perspective as well, but also a response perspective. And so I'm actively engaged. I was actively involved in the initial response to the crisis, in our ability to impact, assess, address not only the residents, the environment, protect the aquifer, but as we continue to do that, and I'll speak a little bit about that later throughout this session. I will tell you that the people up here matter. I know their names. I've worked with them. When we talk about Native Hawaiian organizations, very important to the success of us moving beyond where we are, recovering, and building trust. We cannot do that without the Native Hawaiian organizations, and that is recognized, as well as building the trust with the people and trying to get that back. We have a long way to go. The Navy, the Department of Defense, the Navy is committed, understanding it's a long road, but really, truly committed to making sure that we get this right. We owe it to not only the island, your precious resource, water, and making sure that we don't damage that resource or continue to ruin that trust. And so that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Hi all, my name is Aurora Cabello-Viviani, right? And I'm here trying to think about how I do my introductions because one, I'm a graduate of Powell, which was like a sort of sister to Ma'imai, and we shared an A+ program, very different generations. But I'm also Kamehameha School's graduate. I earned my environmental engineering degree at MIT, and then came back home to UH Manoa to follow a hydrologist who's now at Kamehameha Schools. And I ended up in a botany department doing physiology and plant-water relations, and then eventually worked in pre-engineering education in the UH system, trying to pull students into two-year programs and matriculate at Manoa. But sorry, I'm giving too much life story. I obtained my degree in geography, PhD in geography. How I relate to Red Hill is in a couple different ways. I'm the newest member on the commission. I started my term of service last July, I believe, and I was quickly dropped into Red Hill. The October 20 FTAC meeting was really my first immersion. And then shortly after I interviewed for my current position, my husband, who works at Leeward Community College, was reached out to by a student if she could get help testing her water. So I was part of the formation, the initial call to UH staff, faculty of WRC that convened and eventually became the UH Red Hill Task Force that Mia Comeros in the audience now helps coordinate and Tom Jambaluka supports. So through my commission role, I was also helping gather information for the Red Hill Permitted Interaction Group, which was tasked with researching the issue and presenting back to the full commission. So there's been a lot of research both on the technical end and coordination at UH side that I've helped with, and on the commission side, and both are basically volunteer roles. So, I mean, I'm not officially in a or directly impacted by Red Hill, but I appreciate being able to contribute to this conversation.
Thanks, Aurora. So before I go to a little bit more difficult questions, I'm going to throw an easy one to Captain Geertsma. If you can talk about it, of course, how is the unpacking going?
Yeah, so I'm going to be very careful because the JTF is now in charge of that operation.
Stands for Joint Task Force.
Yes, sir, thank you. So the Joint Task Force that was set up by the Secretary of Defense under Admiral Aquilino at Indo-PACOM, Admiral Wade is in command of that Joint Task Force. This week we started the unpacking, and I would say between where we were up to the point to when we started this unpacking, working with DOH and EPA and other interested regulators, Coast Guard, we've gone through a lot of preparation to prepare. Not only internally in the unpacking basically is unpacking the soda straws, the pipes, before you get to the tanks. And we have to do those repairs. And so the unpacking will allow us to get back in to do some of those repairs to make sure that the system is resilient so that when we do get to defueling, and then which will lead to closure, we can make sure that that's done safely. But we've had the last couple of months running through drills with the EPA, oversight of DOH, of us, going through those exercises and events. This week we started on Tuesday, Wednesday, yesterday, and today should be the conclusion. Everything is going well at present.
Thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
So I'll go a little bit more pointed questions. And Red Hill has been a catastrophe in my mind, an environmental catastrophe. And it's not going to be an issue of today, tomorrow, 2, 3, 4 years from now. It's going to be an issue decades to come. So the question I wanted to ask, and I'm going to ask it two different ways. One, I want to ask, what is the commitment of the Department of Defense to actually be a good neighbor, not for the next 2, 3, 4 years, but for the next decades in order to monitor this environmental catastrophe? And maybe General Hashimoto can
Okay,
take that one.
I can start off, and the commitment is absolute, and that comes from the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. So he was here with his wife a couple of weeks ago, and ever since he directed the closure of the facility, the closure and the cleanup of the facility, that our commitment has been unwavering. I know that there have been thoughts that it is somehow not, but I can assure you that that is the Department of Defense's commitment. I think it is backed up by resources, and even more so an understanding that, of course, this has always been the truth, but as I talked about the way forward, it really brought things into focus that the way that we go forward, like I said, is together. And so the Department of Defense knows that when it comes to all of the stakeholders in the state of Hawaii, that you do things with people, not to them. And the second thing is, there's a very, very, very meaningful way of life here in Hawaii that I can communicate to the military leadership, is that you do the right thing for the right reason. So for none other than the fact that doing the right thing for the right reason, not because we want to achieve all of our objectives, but knowing that we have to be good partners for the state, and it goes beyond Red Hill. But I think it goes to the point where to be a member of the family, you have to, the military is going to have to figure out ways to help the state figure out its most difficult challenges. Those of us who have lived here all our lives know what those are. You can choose them. Cost of living, economic diversification, traffic, homelessness, environmental resiliency, all of those things that the military has to become a part of that. And I think there's a piece of your question, sir, that probably Captain Gertzma can address with respect to testing and things like that.
Actually, I would like to turn to Don on that,
Okay.
and maybe put you on the spot, Don, and say, hey, as a scientist, how do you see a plan that spans decades of monitoring the environmental impact of this incident?
Well, I think the first step that I see is to understand the system, to understand how groundwater is moving beneath Red Hill, how it's interacting with the contaminants in the ground, what areas are at risk. And I make this point repeatedly when I get into conversation about Red Hill, that what we don't know about Red Hill, we don't know about the rest of Hawaii. That our understanding of hydrogeology here is very limited. We have a very simple picture, not to say kind of a naive picture of how the groundwater system operates. And the take-home message for me from 7 years now that I've spent working with Department of Health is that it is extremely complex. What we hope to do over the next few years is to do the geophysics, to do the geochemistry, to do the measurements in the wells, and develop a very clear understanding that we can test against measurements in the field to say, this is how water is moving through the system. This is where the contaminants are. This is where they may be able to travel to. And this is, and truth be told, we haven't sort of as a community invested in understanding our water system now for going on 50 years. I had the privilege of learning from a couple of the masters here, whose names now are, I think, largely forgotten except at the university, Gordon MacDonald and Harold Stearns. They did a magnificent job with their colleagues of describing Hawaii's groundwater and geology. But since their passing in the 70s, we haven't really invested in that understanding. And going forward, we really do need to put the time and the resources in, and supporting the Commission on Water Resources Management, supporting the Department of Health, to help them make good, technically sound decisions. But what we will have to do at Red Hill is develop that understanding, identify then what kind of a monitoring program will be required over the long term, and whether in fact there are remediation actions that can be taken to accelerate the processes of eliminating the contaminants that have accumulated over the years.
Thanks, Don. So I'm going to put Aurora on the spot on this one. And all the science is great, and all the talk about science is great, but when I was talking to Aurora, she told me the most important thing is really not the science, but the trust and who delivers the message. And in your opinion, Aurora, is that trust ever going to be rebuilt, or who delivers the message is important, and how do we go forward from here?
Yeah, you know, that topic has come up a lot in conversations, and so can that trust be reestablished? I think there's always the possibility, but it takes work, right, for anything. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, I'm trained initially as an engineer, but you know, you go and look at water issues, and a lot of them are not technical. They have a lot to do with relationships, as was mentioned in the earlier panels. And so, you know, we're not always trained into how to do that. You know, what conversations need to be had. And I don't think I said that exactly, but I said like it's more than chemistry.
Yes.
Like we could analyze, and we have been analyzing samples, and really you could really dig deep into the data, but that doesn't solve the long-term problem of will people be willing to drink their water again. You know, you could have samples that do not fluoresce, but if you don't trust the water, you're not going to drink it. You're going to keep drinking bottled water. You're going to keep bathing at your friend's house. You're going to be anxious when you have to put your kid in the bath. And that stress creates problems. So how do you rebuild the trust? Are you trusting the institutions that are giving you the information? That's one of the things that we realized at UH was like people were asking UH to analyze the samples because they didn't trust the Navy. There wasn't, you know, they were saying we put out the samples and nobody picked it up, or, you know, and then the news coverage, you know, it shows that maybe they weren't analyzing for the right compounds. But, you know, we were like, okay, people look to UH as a trusted institution. Why? You know, a disinterested party. And then on the commission side, people were looking to the commission because, not that we necessarily had power, but we had this open forum of a monthly communication where people could provide testimony and they could begin to feel heard. So I think trust can be reestablished, but there needs to be intentional effort to do that. And it's not to say that the water doesn't need to be cleaned up. I think it needs both to happen. And I don't know, can I pass it to Tara here?
Yeah, actually I was ready to pass it to Tara.
Yeah,
and then to Joe.
you experienced this directly and you saw it.
Yeah, so I think that this is complicated. Being a mom, I'm going to take it out of academia. I had all three of my kids in less than 3 years, so you know I had my share of bickering in the house. This one hurt that one, and now this one's crying. When that would happen, my kids weren't allowed to say I'm sorry, because more often than not that was a lie. And speaking from experience, that's how the community feels right now, is that they've been lied to. When my kids apologized, they were given a formula. I was wrong for, and they had to think about how to fill in that blank. The second part is, please forgive me for, and they had to think about the impact that was on that other person. Did I hurt your feelings? Did I make you stub your toe? Whatever it is. I did something that affected your life. And then the third part of it is, next time I will. And obviously it takes a while to fill that out when you're 5, when you're 3, even when you're 15, right? And so rather than calling it a timeout, I said, why don't you just take a minute and think about that? And if you need to practice on me before you go talk to your sibling, I'm here. And then we would work through that. How many of you ever experienced apologizing to somebody and that person says, I don't forgive you? My kids said that to each other, and then the one who caused the harm, now they're crying, she said she won't forgive me. I said, well, they don't have to. Because sometimes in life, people don't forgive you. That doesn't mean that they quit. My kids love each other today. And now they're 19, 20, and 21, right? So rebuilding trust, yeah, there could be a formula, but there's going to be big, long blanks that you have to fill in. So please forgive me for, I was wrong for, you have to accept what happened. And in the beginning, there was a lot of, there wasn't a leak. And those are documented in the town halls. And then finally it came out there was a leak and retractions had to be made. So those types of things need to be owned up to, but rewind it even further than that. Right now we're looking at the impact of a spill that took place and harmed the military families. But hasn't the local community been talking about this for decades? So what about these first voices that have been saying something for a long time? But because they weren't the privileged voices of the military family, they were ignored because they could be. That has to be owned too, because it's not just the military families that need to be restored trust with. It's also Hawaii. Yeah. And so when you say, please forgive me for, you've got a lot to unpack with that. There's a lot of health issues. Yes, that is a whole separate issue. I appreciate that you said that. But some of the symptoms that I know I have, I've found out because I talked to somebody else who has them. Not because somebody was approaching me with medical expertise that knows exactly what symptoms to look for and asked me, are you experiencing this? For me to be like, actually, yes, it's been slowly coming on for the past 1 year. I didn't realize that could possibly be related to water I drank. That would have helped rebuild some trust. When you say, next time I will, I think one thing that needs to be realized is this already is the next time. And mistakes were repeated from Camp Lejeune. And so things like that need to be thought about.
Thank you so much, Tara. This is really important to be said. And actually, I'm going to turn to you, Joe, because Tara brought actually the Native Hawaiian community, and I know there is not a lot of trust there either.
Yeah, we're, our role in working with the University of Hawaii is to support Dr. Thomas's efforts. We're engineers, we're not scientists. Our job is to get out there, and if he needs to get certain information, certain data collected, we'll get out in the field, we'll collect that data, we'll give it to him, and he'll make a scientific decision as to what is happening with the aquifer. One good thing in my mind to try and help gain the community's trust is, I think, a decision that was made by Admiral Vanderlei, who used to be the NAVFAC Pacific commander. When this came down and they had the spills and everybody was just on edge, and normally what happens is any institution, you kind of sit back and you kind of you don't want to say anything because you feel you're at blame. So a lot of times you don't want to share information, and when you don't want to share information, people kind of wonder what's really going on. But I think Admiral Vanderlei made a really good decision by saying, okay, we're going to hire the University of Hawaii. And we're going to have the University of Hawaii go out and take a serious look as to what's happening with the aquifer. And by doing that, he also was going to basically not have the Navy filter any of the information that was going to be presented to the community. And that's why I believe that is a big step towards regaining trust in the community, because as we're doing this work, like the other day I was in the office, and this is not part of what Don is doing, but we're doing some water sampling in some of the Army residences. And Jane McKee, who's sitting here in the audience, and sits next to me, and Mark, who's going to be working for Don on this project, I said, hey, you guys are doing some sampling out in the community. What are you seeing? Is there anything in the water that you would be concerned about? And her comment to me, even though we're a small part of the overall sampling of that water out there, was, we don't see anything, Joe. it looks like it's safe. I mean, again, we're but a small group of samples that we're taking, and what we are finding, see, I trust her, she gives me the information, I automatically going to sit back and go, hey, if she's telling me she lives in the community, she paddles, she loves the environment, she tells me she's not seeing anything that she would be concerned about. It makes me feel confident that the information that we're producing that we can disclose to the community is positive. Now, the big concern I have is how open and transparent are these agencies going to be? Primarily, again, I'm not criticizing, but how transparent can the Navy be in providing information to the broader community? So if it's going through the University of Hawaii and they have the ability to provide this unfiltered information to the community and basically say, this is the results, this is what we're finding, for the good or the bad of whatever we're finding, this is it. I think that will do a lot towards giving people confidence that the information is accurate, unfiltered, and not being crafted in a way to protect any entity's interests. And I've worked with the DoD over a number of years, and we've seen certain clients that do want to filter information. They do have an agenda. And not just the DoD, private industry, a lot of groups do that. But I think this effort that Don is going to be undertaking and the results that he provides, and if it is going to be unfiltered as the Navy says it will be, it'll be a positive step in the right direction.
Thanks.
So I'm part of UH, but I feel like Don, we're part of kind of two parallel efforts. And I want to make that clear, I think, because you're at HIGP and I'm affiliated with Water Resources Research Center. So I know we've been in dialogue, but there are multiple efforts. And one of the things that we've learned on the WRC sort of ad hoc Red Hill Task Force, UH Red Hill Task Force, has found is that it's not only just information that's unfiltered, but the need to help interpret it and make it accessible for community consumption, because we have thousands of pages of PDFs on the Safe Waters website, but how do we make it understandable to someone who can't read a Eurofins report? I mean, I certainly can't. So it's really working to try and, how does it help answer where the community's concerns are? That's ongoing effort.
Yeah, I'll say I agree. One, the partnership matters with the University of Hawaii, and to the extent as we work with Mr. Picard and the Native Hawaiian organizations, that's the only way we can get back to where we can at least be as forthright and transparent as possible. And again, that's not to put them at the forefront of what might be still perceived as the lie or the not telling the truth. It's to make sure that we can partner and demonstrate. Because even then, like when we talk about the aquifer, the doctor's right. There's a lot of different opinions on how the aquifer, the transport model, if you will, how do you characterize it? How does it flow in all the different layers if you take that apart? Going back to public trust and perception, as a scientist or as an engineer, we can be really good at dazzling, analyzing the calculus problem, and putting it out there, and the public doesn't understand what we're saying. Or the fact that when we tell them the data is this and the water is safe to drink, the reality is they don't believe it, and it's a perception, and it's the public trust. And so then you have to be smart as a human, a compassionate person involved, living in the same community, to do the right things to protect the aquifer, to protect the resource, the water, and also to protect the lives of those people that are impacted. And so the only way we're going to do that, frankly, is through these relationships we have. We have some money that's been granted to the University of Hawaii that allows them to do things completely on their own, looking at those technologies that might innovate, evolve, and be able to test. I think as we look forward, dealing with the Board of Water Supply, the seaworm through DLNR, DOH, EPA. Those partnerships, we're trying to continue to reinforce those and leverage those smartly. Where there's advocacy, there is direction by DOH, and they got to be careful about being perceived as how collaborative are they, because that will also frustrate some of the people that are part of the community. Because wait a minute, why is DOH that close to them? They should be directing the Navy and dictating, and trust me, they do. And so for the right reasons. But what we've done in the long-term sampling, so we have a Red Hill shaft remediation management plan. It's a 2-year plan by which we went into an agreement with Department of Health and EPA, and we're looking at sampling. So typically what we do in a public system is you have that consumer confidence report done on an annual basis, right? 40, 70 samples throughout. You're looking at lead, you're looking at mercury, VOCs, those kinds of things, analytes, and then you publish that. We're doing that by sheer magnitude. So instead of doing the 70 samples, if you will, periodically, whether monthly or quarterly, on an annual, regular basis for safe drinking water, we're going to test upwards of probably about, when we're done for the 2 years, about 7,000 to 8,000 samples. And in those samples, the pages, this goes back what you were saying, they're sent off to EPA certified laboratories back in the mainland. And the pages are thousands of pages thick, validating those results done by chemists. So it's not the Navy doing that. And I think as we move forward, though, I do look forward to those opportunities where we can do dual sampling and we can be perceived as partnering, such that the public is like, well, that's just the Navy. Well, no, it's not just the Navy. We're doing other things in tandem, whether it's with the Board of Water Supply or with UH.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I know there are going to be a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to ask my last question to each and every one of you. So starting with you, General Hashimoto, what is your short-term and long-term vision or outcomes out of the Red Hill crisis? What do you want to see, short-term and long-term?
I guess I would start with long-term, because that is what ultimately is going to matter. And that is a reset of the relationship between stakeholders in the state of Hawaii and the military. I think we've seen that the military, it has a long history here, and there have been a lot of ups and downs. What I would like to see is a greater understanding of values. And let me just kind of introduce you to, people say, what are your values, military? Well, number one, we are relentlessly driven by our mission to keep the peace, and if necessary, be ready to fight and win. That has not changed since Red Hill was built in the 40s, or we started using Makua Valley or Kaho'olawe. We are, as Captain Gertsma said, we are bound by statute. Absolutely, we follow the law. I mean, obviously that is non-negotiable. What has shifted over time is our accountability to stakeholders. So as you have this system that has these 3 points, the one, 2 of them are relatively fixed, the ones associated with statute and mission, but it's the understanding that we have to become closer to stakeholders. We can talk about trusting data, but then in a larger sense, how is that trust built? Talking to Native Hawaiian practitioners, or we just had Joe just gave an example here. I trust a person, well, number one, because I know them. Maybe I don't know them, but what if I know their lineage? Well, if I know their lineage, well, Aurora went to Po'oa Elementary School. Okay, I kind of know her image. She knows mine a little bit, because we went to elementary schools that are not that far away from each other, and there's some level of trust there. That the DoD will prove through its actions that it is truthful in word, deed, and intention. The DoD also has to demonstrate changed behavior. So we have, Tara, not an excuse, but an explanation. I mean, you're from a military family, so we were told to learn about other cultures. There is a DoD culture. And it's been expressed partially here in some of the things that people saw. Never assume risk. Don't set precedent. Don't show weakness. Always have to act like you have all the answers. Because of the business we're in, showing weakness is not rewarded. However, that is the opposite of when you're trying to develop partnerships. So we have to get better at that. So I think what we'll see in the short term is that the trust can be repaired, reestablished, one action at a time. I tell people there are no words that can be spoken that can move that dial, and in the long term, again, those behavioral changes that we talked about. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Joe?
Mine is real simple. I mean, I think short term, I'd like people to be able to just be confident when they turn on the faucet and have a drink of water, it's safe, right? Safe drinking water. And long term, to ensure that it's being protected for future generations of the state of Hawaii. I mean, that's a real basic thing. It's got a lot of science that's got to get done to identify whether or not that's really happening, but I think that's what most of us want. Is the water safe to drink? Is somebody jeopardizing our resource? If it's being jeopardized, what do we got to do to correct that problem?
Don?
Well, short term, of course, our primary focus right now is developing an understanding of the groundwater hydrology in the immediate vicinity of Red Hill, and being able to assist Department of Health and the Water Commission folks and Board of Water Supply in understanding what the real risks are for either residual past releases or the more recent release, what risks they pose to actually impacting the water supply for City and County of Honolulu. But long term, sort of the desired outcome I certainly have is a much better global understanding of each island's groundwater system, to understand very clearly what the inputs are, what the storage is, how the water is flowing through the island and discharging, so that Water Commission and Department of Health will have the information they need to be able to manage this resource for the next 500 years. That's where I would like to be when we're all done here.
Thank you, Dara.
I think that short term, you're right, words are going to be hard, but I think some good words to start with is I believe you, in conjunction with I hear you. When it comes to what we see in our water, what we smell in our water, what we taste in our water, because the sheen on my water comes and goes. In the last year, we've never gone back to drinking it. So, if I call the EOC phone numbers that are provided, they may or may not come and test, and they rarely follow up with results. And so there's that. There's also the I believe you regarding symptoms that you experience. I think it's unfortunate that people don't know what to look for in their own bodies as far as I've consumed jet fuel, what do I need to look for? It's not just digestion issues and GI issues and migraines, it's also neurological issues and balance issues and neuropathy and tremors. And you might not realize that if it took 6 months to develop because you're still consuming water that periodically has a sheen on it, But proactively pursuing the people that have reported being impacted. Those contacts have been collected and can be contacted and say, we are having clinics, please schedule. We're going to go over symptoms. This is what to watch for. I think that would be a huge step in restoring some trust, just to be proactive in looking for resources, because I know people have tried to go get testing or talk to doctors about potential symptoms. Is this a symptom? Could it be connected? And as far as being turned away, or being told, oh, it's probably COVID, because of the COVID symptoms that are out, or, told that it's something different, it's not this, or it could be that, or even just, you're not going to be able to see the doctor can't see you because of whatever. And I think that that's a huge task for the military to face, because, depending on who the person is, they're going to have all different types of insurance, and that shouldn't matter. Whether they have TRICARE Prime or TRICARE Select, or if it's a community member or a retiree, or, somebody who has zero insurance through the military, they should be able to see the doctors and get the neurological treatment or the testing and the evaluations regardless, because we were exposed without bias, so we should be examined without bias. So I think that's the immediate, short term, and I think that moves into a long-term thing, because, unless they really understand, we had women conceiving children during this time and having babies at this time, and nursing moms, what happens to these kids, because we learned a lot about things that happened with the families in previous crises. So I think that healthcare is going to be a big deal, and that I do think that the military can do a lot regardless of branch, regardless of status, and regardless of affiliation, just by providing those services and being proactive about it.
Thank you, Tara.
Yeah, I'll take a different tact, because what's just been previously said is the solid short and long-term goals. I think from my perspective as an engineer NAVFAC, one is that I've got to continue to demonstrate, so short-term, continue to demonstrate that the water is safe. And so that's my immediate short-term goal in that long-term monitoring plan, and trying to figure out ways to partner and enable us to demonstrate that we are committed, to that support, and to that end, that water, that aquifer is protected. That's going to take a while, but I'll call that the short term, because I think the longer piece is when we are committed to the closure of Red Hill and defueling it. But there is going to be a longer term plan that has yet to be determined. We're working internally right now on how do we finally close Red Hill. What does that mean? And so I can't speak to that right now. There are several different options that are out there, as in, lock it up, make sure you can't put fuel in there, and walk away, all the way to the complete 100% removal of the tank infrastructure. And there are varying degrees of cost, and all of that will take time. That is long term. But at the same time, as you make that decision and that determination, you have to continue to figure out, how do we monitor that site for the next, was it 10, is it 20, to protect that aquifer, and then also to protect the environment around. And so we have those monitoring wells. We're drilling another 20 of them. We had about 20 already in place back in the day from 2014 with the AOC that directed us, and soil vapor monitoring. But we're committed to that monitoring and really understanding what is going on with the aquifer, what is going on with the environment, such that we can continue to protect the island and the water.
Thank you. Aurora.
Yeah, I'm coming at this as both sort of a researcher and educator. And I think for me, the short term is really wrapping our brains around the full complexity of what Red Hill has been. I mean, even just listening to this panel, there's the experience of the households and families. There's the experience of people who think about the utility, dominated by the engineers, thinking about what's going through the pipes and what's sorbing. There's people who think about the aquifer and contaminant feed and transport, and we're talking about the same thing, but it reminds me of that parable of the elephant and the blind monks. I don't know if you've seen illustrations of them, like, this is a rope and this is a curtain, and I don't think we fully understand the elephant from the many types of information and data that we have. It's not, and that dictates what we sample for, what we or collect data for from the experiences of affected residents. I think we need to sort of and we're trying with the Red Hill Task Force, but it really needs to be all hands on deck still, even though the urgency has passed. I mean, to fully characterize and understand it and then address the issues. And for me as an educator too, the long term is, and I brought it up in the earlier panel, there's never before been so much interest in water. I taught Bio 101 many years ago and asked students where they got their water, and they said from lakes, and these are kids who grew up in Hawaii. I mean, so they don't understand where their water comes from. Since November, there's never been more interest, and I think everybody now thinks, everybody who's on Oahu is now thinking about this and riveted. So how do we build that capacity to fill the 50% vacancies in DOH, so that we have a generation of water stewards to help make these solutions happen. We're 20 years behind the ball, but like today is the next best time to start. So that's where I'm at. Yeah.
Thanks, Aurora. And with that, I'm pretty sure we're going to have plenty of questions on the topic. So I would like to open it up for the audience to ask questions.
First, thank you. That was a phenomenal panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aloha. Yeah, thank you so much. It's really heartening to hear all of the things that are being done to address the situation. I guess one thing that I wanted to share was just as you move forward, you talked about we don't know very much about the systems, like groundwater system, but there's also, we do know something about them. We have about 2,000 years living and making observations of the landscape, and it's part of our history. And I just wonder how that might be incorporated as you move forward. I guess my question is to you, Dom. I know many years ago we talked about Hawai, and you came to Dr. Wani Hawai and myself to before you started your drilling there, get some information about the place, which served as kind of a prior probability, before moving forward. And I just wonder how you might incorporate that into this issue in Red Hill, which should be the priority right now. But moving forward, how does it fit into thinking about how it might be incorporated and how we think about other watersheds, other places, other by areas. So I wonder what you might be thinking on that. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your question. What I would like to do, and we did make what I think was a very small start at incorporating the Hawaiian knowledge of the groundwater during a prior project, the Ikevai project, where we did have a group go through the Hawaiian newspapers to look for stories that related to water. I felt that was really just touching the edge of that knowledge base. I've for many years have pointed out to students and anybody that will listen that the Hawaiian culture integrated just a phenomenal observational habit to observing the natural environment and incorporating those observations into their stories, into the community knowledge. And I think that's a nearly totally untapped resource. And I would very much like to work with the cultural practitioners to sort of try to draw that information out. And it's not always easy. The stories are allegorical. And in a sense, at one point I mentioned to someone who was sort of trying to say that, you know, there's no information there. And my response was, when you understand the science, you will understand the stories and be able to extract the information that's contained within those stories. I'm hoping we have an opportunity to do that. But I think it's something that is very much worth doing. And at the same time, turning those stories back around to relate and convey those stories to the children, and how these stories are part of the science, part of understanding our environment. So that's kind of where I would like to go with this.
Add a follow-up kind of to you, and I just want to comment. I'm working with a group of Indigenous water scholars last night, just working on revisions on a paper, and one of the challenges where Indigenous knowledge meets science, it can be a very difficult space. One, in interpretation, but two, in the relationship and responsibilities of that exchange. So oftentimes, it's me wearing my technical hat, you know, data is data. So Hawaiian language data is just another source of data. And we use the language of extraction for it, and that really does not sit well with communities that are looking for partners in reciprocity. How is that information getting used? How is it then benefiting the community? You know, not just being a one-way relationship. So I just want to bring it up because this is something I run into like a lot. And it's not just Hawaii, it's everywhere where Indigenous knowledge is seen, I guess, as a resource frontier. And so how do we build partnerships around it so that these complementary knowledges can help us get to where we need to go? So thanks for letting me soapbox.
Thank you. Sir.
Mahalo for this conversation. My dad was in the military back then, and he actually was an MP for Red Hill. My dad passed about 2 years ago here in the Marines. And
Semper Fi.
And he specifically told me that was one of his kuleana to Malama, that area of Red Hill. And he said that he couldn't tell anybody. It was top secret. Reason why, because that tank was to service the whole Pacific during the time of war. So we're not supposed to know these kind of things. We were kind of brought up in our Native Hawaiian community to not push the envelope too much. It basically was a part of our genocidal process as a Native Hawaiian. So now I'm glad we're having this conversation by resolving these so-called issues. And we're going to include cultural genocide as well. Because when you start talking about the methodology on how Native Hawaiians have a key role, we've always been on the outside looking in. Always been on the outside looking in. Now I'm glad that it rose to this point to bring in awareness to the general community, but then at the same time, how do you collaborate to create a real discussion with the ones that are being really, truly impacted, which is our resources for Native Hawaiian, our methodology, all those kinds of things. I'm glad we're having this conversation, but we're still stuck on how would you say, an identity crisis, all based upon somebody else's dream. So I just want to remind everybody here, that we're still a minority. We've always been a minority. And I'm glad that we have people that really care and understand our plight, because this is the beginning of trying to solve something that is very complicated.
Yeah. Please.
mahalo for today. I was invited today just as a community member, a 3-year guest of Hawaii, and an affected Red Hill family. And I was so amazed, first of all, mahalo to all the speakers of just the lessons I was able to learn today and understand the greater community and the impact on the greater Hawaiian future. So I have a question in general addressed towards the military, but really I'd love to hear from some of the civilian speakers on the panel. The question I have is related to one theme I continually heard today, which were the idea of one water, one community. Kaleo, I think earlier today, spoke about the need for each person to come to a place of commonality, that we approach problems from understanding everybody's view and perspective and impact of any issue. And I heard about today, real problems require real innovation, which require real collaboration in meaningful, deliberate, and intentional conversations. And I think that truly the future of Hawaii's vibe lies in that idea, of the idea that there are difficult problems that all of our experts have commented about Red Hill in particular that I'll ask about. So for the military panelists and for the civilian, one of the things about restoring trust, there have been mentioned things, for example, adding a community expert who's a civilian onto the Red Hill Task Force. I know Aurora's name's been mentioned, Mr. Lau's name's been mentioned. How do you view inviting those members of the Hawaiian community onto the task force, and is that something the military has considered? And I'm curious if there are security issues, or is that something that you could more openly step outside of the norm or the policy of practice? I'm just curious your take on that, and have there been discussions about the possibility of that, and if it's not a potential, how do you see then the steps moving forward for trust in the Deep Ulan Plan? Thank you. Mahalo.
I'll take that one first. Maybe if you've been following the Joint Task Force's news releases, but Admiral Wade has mentioned the formation of an information sharing group. So while this is separate from the university's Red Hill Task Force, I can tell you that that information sharing group is modeled somewhat after the Mauna Kea group that was formed to assist in the management of that. And so we were advised to take a look at that construct to form a body like that to help us better understand, provide us with insights and recommendations that would give voice to those people directly to the folks who are removing the fuel. And the way I view that is that's a harbinger of the way that the DoD can and should do business moving forward. So that's been a priority effort for them, and I think there's probably so thanks. That's what's going on. We're thinking along those same lines because the gentleman whose father was a Marine, again, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Thank you for his service. That we talked about behavioral change. So thank you for using, the word collaboration, early and comprehensive collaboration. That's definitely one thing that's got to happen, and it has to be when the military comes in. What I talk about is greater humility and respect in those conversations. And the last thing is to speak with a sense of much greater historical and cultural literacy during these conversations. Thanks.
Can I contribute? My answer will not be as my role as supporting the University of Hawaii as an engineering company. My answer would be to the gentleman that raised the issue about Native Hawaiian involvement, and the lady there about how do you engage the Native Hawaiian community. I observe it all the time where, I have that feeling that a lot of times the Native Hawaiians are outside looking in. even though we're the people of Hawaii. And I got a lot of baggage on that issue, you know. I mean, I sit down and I think about it all the time. Vasilis knows, when I came back home about 30 years ago, there's a lot of opportunity working for the DoD in Hawaii. But as a Native Hawaiian, you go out there and you see very few Native Hawaiian businesses involved. And, fortunately for me and the people that work for our organization, and we try to hire as many Native Hawaiians as we possibly can. Senator Inouye created this Native Hawaiian organization entity back in 2003, and it basically is supposed to be an economic model for the Native Hawaiian community to engage and work with the federal government like the Alaskans do and Native American tribal organizations. It's a way for us as a community to not be outside the fence looking in. It's our opportunity to somehow train our young folks as engineers, as scientists, and give them the kinds of opportunities that they don't have out there. We, up until us working with the Army, there were no Native Hawaiian companies doing ordnance removal in the state of Hawaii, even though there's hundreds of millions of dollars of ordnance removal work that's got to get done on the Big Island and all these other locations. Until we started working with the University of Hawaii, there was no chance for Native Hawaiians to participate. Keep knocking the microphone, getting excited here, sorry.
Must be the Hawaiian.
Because this is a passion of mine. And I used to get really frustrated. I would sit back and go, how come the Native Hawaiian companies are not out there cleaning DHL shale lands out? We got a lot of Hawaiian homelands that are contaminated with ordnance. Why aren't we out there the ones that are being able to take advantage of the opportunities? Similar kind of situation with Red Hill. For the first time ever, I was invited because we were doing a consulting engineers report early on to determine, just to write a report about what happened with those 2 spills that occurred. I walk through the tunnel and I see companies from Texas and Oklahoma and Georgia. And I don't see a single local company, let alone a Native Hawaiian employee working in the tunnels. Extremely upsetting to me. And the reason why we're standing on the outside looking in is because we were never given the opportunity to develop the skill set to be over there earning one of these great livings as a scientist or engineer to work on these projects. I grew up in Kahuku. I was in a plantation town. None of my family ever went to college. I was the first one that went. There's never been a family member of mine that ever got licensed or went to engineering school. And that's primarily because, in my mind, we were never given the opportunity. Plenty of smart people, brilliant people. And we need to take advantage of opportunities when they come. There's few and far between. And that's why I'm so grateful to the University of Hawaii, Dr. Sirmos, Don Thomas. They hire companies like us to work for them, whereas we would never have had the opportunity to do it if we went to some military institution and marketed ourselves, because there's the perception that we don't have the intelligence, we don't have the academic background, nor the experience to do an adequate job in servicing some of these organizations. And my message to the young Hawaiians that work for our NHO is, you can't do it, don't give up, don't take no for an answer. Get out there, assert yourself as a Hawaiian, and create that opportunity where in the past it never existed. So I have a passion for it. We're making tremendous progress. And again, that's why I'm saying, I'm not answering the question as a supporting engineering company at the University of Hawaii. I'm answering the question as a Hawaiian. And there's tremendous opportunity out there for us if we're willing to fight for it.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question.
Nice to see you, sir.
Sir, a couple of questions for you, sir. I just want to say that trust is earned. It'll be step by step. And everybody's watching. The idea of involving the community in this process is a positive step, and I hope that it will work out successfully. But it also means transparency and sharing information freely about what the challenges and issues currently and in the past with this resident facility, as opposed to hiding behind redactions. So I hope you would open yourself, be able to share that information so we can fully understand the problems and challenges we are dealing with as a community for our resources. I guess that's a statement, but a question here, and Tara, I really feel your pain. I can't imagine having exposure directly to fuel contaminated drinking water out of your faucet that you and your family was exposed to. But General, I'd like to ask that the civilians that were part of this joint base Pearl Harbor water system also be included for support for medical tests, for follow-up treatment as necessary until they're through this, because there are civilians that also, not Board of Water Supply customers, but civilians that are your customers and that of your water system, that I believe it's responsibility of the DOD to also support their needs. And the other thing too, that kind of troubles me is, sirs, you consider this current situation an emergency.
Thanks a lot, sir. First, the treatment for the non-military members, I think they are part of the registry that has been established, so certainly a first step and a little ways to go in terms of their medical treatment, but certainly getting them on that will be certainly go a long ways in ensuring that they are part of the system going forward. The emergency word question I know has been asked several times. Another thing about military DNA, we have these quaint phrases we say is like, words have meaning and use precise words precisely. So we have a whole vocabulary, and emergency actually is not in our vocabulary. We use words like crisis, contingency, and things like that. So I think actually if you looked at, we actually have our own dictionary. We actually are, except in speaking in casual terms, actually don't use that term. So it's really hard for us to translate that into military speak. I think what does speak to that is the actions that have been taken. We talked about the establishment of this organization called the Joint Task Force. And I will tell you that the 120 folks who are working down there at the theater at Ford Island was put together. The quality of people, to include their leader, Rear Admiral Wade, handpicked people. The other resources besides the people that have been put against it, I think the speed, and that I know that's a relative term, I think goes to the nature of our response, not avoiding that, well, it's not an emergency, that's not what I'm saying, just not part of our vocabulary. Certainly a very, very serious situation that required us to respond as quickly as we possibly can. So that's how I would address that.
Is it okay if I add something onto that? With your permission? Mr. Lau, may I have your permission to add something to that? Given what you've just said, not having the term emergency in the vocabulary, that actually caused harm to quite a few people.
Okay.
And that needs to be reevaluated severely. Needs to be reevaluated. Because of that lack of vocabulary, people who live in the community and weren't affiliated with the military, they could not leave their homes. My family was at least fortunate to be displaced into a hotel, but because the word emergency could not be used without it being in that vocabulary, their insurance wouldn't cover it, and the military wouldn't provide it. So they were forced to continue staying in that home. And there's countless of other examples, but that's just going to be the one I give. But that's a failure.
Thank you for that. Again, not that the military never used that word, because I think, Captain Gertzma, there actually is funding. I forget what it's, the triple E funding, and I think one of those is emergency. So what does that stand for?
I off the top of my head, sir, I don't know.
Right. So at the beginning
out
of
of my lane, but yes,
so I think at the beginning of the situation, certainly emergency funding was put toward it, and I hear you and I believe you.
And I appreciate the Department of Defense starting to learn skills that are important in with communities, because we don't operate by the military's dictionary, your vocabulary, but you need to learn our skills and to also listen to the Kanaka Maoli and what they are saying.
I agree.
And so please consider, I think you're starting to move in that direction with greater community involvement to learn this new language of being able to talk to people. I would ask in this Mauna Kea-like group that also the Department of Health and the US EPA, I think, should be a part of this group, because we as community members, just speak on behalf of the water supply, 1 million people that we serve every day with drinking water. The questions will come up that only the regulators can answer in these discussions. And it isn't fair just for the military or DOD to be there in that group, because you won't be able to answer some of these questions and concerns. So I think the State Department of Health and the US EPA would be a part of this group also.
Please, sir.
Hello, Kako. My name is Mauna Kea Bengual. I actually was served on the Mauna Kea working group, and have now been appointed to serve as on the Mauna Kea Authority. So it's interesting to hear that this is the model. Thank you.
We heard it works. We want to use techniques that work, that are appropriate solutions, in this environment.
And this is our working test to see it too. And we want to speak to that it wasn't something that was willfully happened. We had to start off with marching and standing for a long time and rally by the tens of thousands to be heard before we were actually able to even get our foot in the door. And this is the first time that Native Hawaiian voices are being allowed to stand in a position of authority and decision making and not advisory. That's where we've kind of like, we're done with being just seen as advisory, so we can be checked off the list as okay, we talked today. But so that we can bring that foundation of thousands of years of historical understanding and scientific observation into the forefront of these discussions. It is absolutely known by our people in many different ways, how our water moves through our environment and the diversity of what it is amongst islands. Kane ko kala, kane ko kala loa, kane ko kala kuhonua, kane ko kala kuhonua, kane ko kala kiu. All these different aqueducts and aquedikes that we understand how water flows and moves. And so this is very, of course, a very particular topic that I want to see here too, because we are stepping forward to start laying a new solid foundation for the protection of Mauna Kea. Water is absolutely an intrinsic part of it. That's one of the sacredness of the mountains, the ability to capture and disperse water. So in understanding that, understanding the topography of the Ko'olau mountain range and how it serves water or distributes that water, it's critical. But to also be able to approach these things as a holistic system and how it is intertwined all the way into the wider effects of these things, so that this is not an isolated situation. And I think that's the important thing to remember. Within the honua, the ave, or the branches of how water moves, it's almost unfathomable. That's why it's the realm of Kanaloa, it's the unseen realm. And so how far out these aqueducts can affect out into the ocean, we're talking about some of the Punawai break almost a mile offshore. So how far is the measurement really being taken? But just, not going into all of that, but my concern is, or question being too, is that, or advice moving forward too, is that this also helped to set precedents for all other military movement or discussions in anything in Hawaii, of course. And when it comes to the discussion of trust, again, this is not an isolated incident. You're also having to contend with decades and decades and almost a century of military abuse of these items. I mean, military occupation. Let's start with that one. And then we are still cleaning up the ordinance across Hawaii Island, across many items. Kaho'olawe is still not clean. And so when we hear the ideas that we will address it, it's like, well, we're still waiting for the other one to still be fixed. So it is continuing that line. So I think in that step for gaining more trust is, it's not going to be solved in this. And know that you're not also being held accountable for this one action. It's many things. And so I think moving forward in a collective, as a community, I really want to, that was kind of shocking to hear that a branch of the military, the function of being a service to protect a people or a community, a nation, doesn't speak the same language as it's the nation that it's meant to serve. And that's where it seems, and that's, I think many of us, if we pay our taxes, we realize something's out of whack here. You know, how it's being held as so much more superior than those who you're meant to protect. So just in that approach to, as we step into hopefully this new age of understanding that the importance of caring for community, for caring for environment, that we're all servants. And when we put ourselves into these roles of service for community, that it is an honor to serve, and therefore humility is important. And so in that, my quick question too is also in the concern of the application moving forward, that this not be held solely to the Red Hills situation, but that perhaps this model needs to be duplicated in any military installation across Hawaii. We are now, of course, in my neck of the woods, at the base of Mauna Kea, you have the largest military base in the Pacific, Oahualoa, which with the studies done there, it's one of the most shallowest aquifers. And around 600 feet, we're already hitting water, and yet there's still live ammunition happening on top of that. So as we look at that situations as well, I guess there's nothing we can answer right now, but if that, to encourage this type of communal, balanced decision-making models be applied wider and beyond.
I completely agree with you. And we talked about a requirement. I think it's non-negotiable. We talked about the bold changes in behavior that are necessary. Like I said, acting with humility and respect, understanding that we don't have all the answers, speaking with cultural and historical literacy. Not everyone who comes here from the military benefited from being exposed to Hawaiian history like those of us who grew up here. I find myself mentioning incidents that have occurred even before 1893 that I think surprise some people, but it is critical to understanding. Like I said in my opening statements, my role is to help the military understand where we have been and how that impacts where we're going to go using those methods that you're talking about. So what I would urge everyone is to closely observe the activities and the communications and the intent of the defueling process, because I think you will see a lot of those behaviors that have been described. As for the language issue, I think all professional undertakings kind of have their own language. Again, I don't use that as an excuse, just simply as an explanation. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And with that, I think we can conclude this session.
I was just going to ask, I think I come to this space, I'm on my way to Switzerland, and I do a lot of work with Switzerland. And I think maybe the most effective way we can end our time together is to take a moment of silence. And I think this conversation, sometimes forget what this is all about. Not only is it Red Hills, but we have communities that we're
Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to thank everybody on the panel.